Hi there peeps in Videoland, this is John here. Today I'm going to make some banana nut muffins or cupcakes, if you'd like to call them. That is, we're going to use these pans and little cups and make some tasty treats. First of all, the most important thing, of course, is to have your recipe. Otherwise, how are you going to know what to put in them? So, the first thing to do is we want to do some of the advanced preparation. For example, we want to cut up some nuts. You see, I've got all my ingredients out here together for convenience, and I'm going to put a cup of chopped up walnuts in there. So let me measure out a cup. And I've got my fancy Chinese knife. We'll just cut up these nuts. Oh yes, and don't worry about knowing the recipe because I'll put it up on the site. You don't want the nuts too fine, kind of coarse is what the recipe calls for. Okay, next, some things we can do in parallel. So next what I'm going to do is this sugar and the butter. It calls for 1 1/4 cups sugar. I already have the cup out here. Oops, a little bit too much. There. Got our cup. 1/4. And we take our butter. Now, I put the butter in the microwave for about 15 seconds to soften it up a little bit. You don't want it runny, but you don't want it too hard either. Mix it together. And so we start out kind of slow because the butter's kind of chunky. And then gradually increase the speed a little bit. You can see it mixing it away there. Now this is kind of an important step because you want the sugar and the butter to be mixed really well, kind of creamy. And then I add eggs. Calls for 2 eggs. Let me stop that for a minute. Also, it's a good idea to scrape things a little bit. A little butter stuck there. Okay. Now, while the eggs and the butter and sugar are mixing, that's a good time to mash up the bananas. It's best if you've got bananas that are kind of brown like this. Unfortunately, I only got 2. You need usually 3. I'm going to use 4. I went back to the store, got a couple more. I've got a handy little masher tool. It's nice to have the right tools. I mean, you don't have to have all this stuff, but it's easiest if you have tools for specific purposes. And I'm just kind of mashing up these bananas. Fortunately, because they're kind of bright, it's easy to do. Okay, so there, we have some kind of mashed up bananas. And meanwhile, our butter and sugar has been, and egg have been mixing nicely. And the next thing we're going to do, let me speed it up a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is to put in the more liquid ingredients, the bananas and some milk and vanilla. Let me just kind of dump this in. Calls for 1/2 cup of buttermilk, but I never have buttermilk, so I'm going to use regular milk. Usually, I might put in a few drops of what is it called? Vinegar to kind of make it more sour like buttermilk. But this time, I'm going to try just plain milk, see what the difference is. It also calls for a teaspoon of vanilla. That's vanilla. 1 teaspoon. And then we mix it some more. Let me scrape it a bit. And then after that, we're going to add our dry ingredients. Now, the recipe calls for 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. That means white flour. But I like to use kind of half whole wheat flour and half white flour to just kind of give it a little nod to healthy eating. Now this here, oops, this is whole wheat flour that I ground myself. In our garage over there, we have a wheat grinder, and I'll grind up a couple batches and just save it to use for cooking. So this is probably good enough. And so 2½ cups. So actually, I'll use about 1 cup of the whole wheat flour. Sometimes in like desserts, like with bread and things, I'll use all whole wheat flour. But for stuff like desserts, you kind of want it to be a little more kind of fluffy and soft. So I compromise and do part white flour. We can just dump that in there. And then also white flour. I'll use the rest white flour, 2½ cups. I mean, 1